Erstklassisch mit Mischke, der musikalische Podcast des Hamburger Abendblatts.
Schönen guten Tag zu einer neuen Folge. Ich bin wie immer in meinem Arbeitszimmer. Mein Gast ist diesmal ganz woanders, nämlich, wie ich gerade erfahren habe, irgendwo im Norden von Karelien, also in Finnland, also in der Nähe von Russland. Also kann es eigentlich nur ein Finne sein, ist es auch. Es ist ein finnischer Geiger. Ich hoffe, ich spreche den Namen halbwegs richtig aus. Pekka Kuusisto. Was that right? Sort of.
Sehr schön. Thank you.
Wir sprechen uns, weil er demnächst hier in Hamburg ist. Er hat am 9. Mai ein Konzert mit Santo Matthias Ruvali und dem Philharmonia London. Die kommen in die Elbphilharmonie und spielen das Dessner Violinkonzert, Beethoven 6. und Rossini, eine Ouvertüre. Und ich wollte schon immer mal mit ihm sprechen. Jetzt hat es endlich geklappt. Ich freue mich, dass das hingehauen hat nach langem Hin und Her. Und da mein Finnisch nicht vorhanden ist, sprechen wir auf Englisch, aber ich hoffe, das ist kein Problem. So, hello and thank you very much for being here and very much welcome. And I'm trying this, but I'm not quite sure whether it's right. Kiitos paljon. Is that sort of Finnish?
Ole hyvä. It sounds very good. Thank you.
Okay.
But Finnish is convenient. It's sort of more a club than a country, because there's only about 5.5 million people on the planet who can speak the language. So if you want to go to the trouble, you are in a quite exclusive place.
Mm-hmm. And there's about 8 million saunas I've learned recently in your country as well.
Something like that. I'm at the moment at my in-laws, my wife's parents. And between my home and my wife's parents' home, there are 5 saunas. So it sounds about right.
Okay. We always start here with you having to, or being able to choose whether you want to start with an easy question or a complicated one. Which one would you prefer?
Let's start with the complicated one. Life is complicated.
Okay. Is your profession work or fun?
I try to make it a combination of a profession and a hobby. I think when I start doing something that I don't really know how to do, there's a period of time where it's more of a hobby. And then at some point, sooner or later, usually later, I hopefully feel that it has become a part of my profession. And then I have to invent something else to try.
So making mistakes is a big part of your job.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And getting away with it.
Sometimes, and sometimes not. I think our profession in general is a little bit too much obsessed with recognizing mistakes in the actual playing. And not enough obsessed with recognizing mistakes in the human interaction. So I wish we would allow people to play a bit more risky, but to take each other into account, into consideration a bit more.
Do you want to have the complicated question as well?
Yeah, just keep them coming. Thank you.
No, we're just getting started. The longest time in your life without going into a sauna? How long can a Finn survive without getting into a sauna?
Well, I did study in the United States when I was I was in my late teens. I was basically 5 years in America. And in the beginning of that patch, there was a 9-month period when I did not visit my home country at all. So I think that must be the longest period. I didn't quite recognize myself at first after that, but I got over it. And now I live in a place that has two saunas. One of them is electric, one of them is wood fired, and it's a few times a week at minimum.
Let's change the topic then and get to something about music. I found
What's your relationship to sauna? Do you have one?
I really enjoy it, but I don't have the time. And during those 2 or 3 last years, you weren't really able to get into one. And I've never had the chance in the last month. But of course, I love it. But I'm not a Finn, so I love it on a lower level than you loved it.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't put yourself down. It's any kind of. I think the beautiful part about sauna is that there shouldn't be like a separate class for connoisseurs. That everybody who loves sauna is equal. But I have to say that you might be interested that there's a type of sauna that a lot of Finnish people consider the kind of the urtext sauna that hasn't quite made it into the international circulation. We call it the smoke sauna, which you heat it for several hours. And it's not an organized sauna stove like in most places, but it's basically just a pile of rocks with a fireplace underneath and no chimney. The smoke is in the room. So you heat the room and for hours and hours and hours, from the afternoon to the evening. And then when the pile of rocks, a mountain of rocks is hot enough, then you let the smoke out. And then you put some handtuch or something on the benches so that your behind doesn't get all dark when you sit down. And then it stays hot for hours and hours when the fire has gone out. The fire has to have gone out, otherwise you will die of carbon monoxide poisoning. But when the fire has died out, then you go in and it's like a Bruckner sauna in the sense that the crescendo is very gradual. When you throw water, it's not a sforzando. It's very long crescendo with the lower strings and the lower brass first, and then at the end comes the violins and the trumpets and the woodwinds. It's a very, very beautiful experience. So it puts you in a much slower tempo of sauna than the normal thing.
Okay, and that's the good stuff you keep for yourselves, like the Chinese who serve the sort of Chinese food to all of us and keep the good food to themselves.
Exactly. I don't know how politically correct it is to say that, but it's your show.
Okay, let's switch to music then for a while at least. I found a story I found nice, and I guess you've heard it several times because you've been there. But the first record you remembered listening to wasn't Mozart, but Rasputin by Boney M, and the first record you bought was Digiloo Digiley, Sweden's European Song Contest winner, I think, or second place, from a band called the Harrys. So that's a perfect start for a classical career in a way. How did you manage not to end up in a disco band?
Well, I have been in a disco band.
Okay, I'm sorry.
To be completely honest, and I can still quote the beautiful string arrangement of Rasputin from Boney M. There's some absolutely legendary disco violin lines in that song. My father has always been very multi-musical, and he was not even intending to become a musician. He was intending to become a sailor, just out of a need to be a rebel against his family. But jazz music actually lured him back into the profession of music, and then after that he very much got into the world of opera and symphonic music and so on, choir music. But the multi-musicality stayed with him, and as a gift to me and my brother, he gave this idea of multi-musicality when we were already very young. So I must have been about 3 when I heard Rasputin for the first time. And Harris, they did win the Eurovision Song Contest. 3 extremely gifted Mormon brothers from Sweden who were dancing in golden shoes. One of them, I think his name is Rickard Herre, is a very significant lawyer in Sweden, representing the Musicians Union.
Okay.
And I think the other two brothers are just living off the royalties of Digilo Digile.
We nearly missed the point of my question. I mean, how did you get enough decency in yourself to say, no, it's fun and it's great, but I have to stick to this thing that's called violin and I have to play classical music?
Well, to be brutally honest, I didn't.
Okay.
I've been playing all kinds of music basically from the beginning. So because my father was in love with jazz, he taught me and my brother how to improvise based on or play choruses, play jazz solos onto classic sort of evergreen things like Satin Doll by Duke Ellington or Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? These kind of tunes, and that's been going on. And when I was in my very early teens, the company that my father was working for started importing music computers. Actually, this was already when I was 7 or 8. So we had a sort of musical computer at home. And we had a little MIDI studio throughout my entire teenage years. So we would have some synthesizers, some drum machines, some multi-track tape recorders. And me and my brother would create all kinds of weird songs alongside going through a perfectly normal classical violin education, first in Finland and then in Indiana. It's more after becoming an adult when you sort of have responsibilities and you have to organize your time more, when it became a bit more complicated. But I've kept most of that stuff with me. And I do find it like a bit of a sort of extra oxygen when I get to play. Last weekend, I played a little bit of Piazzolla with some friends of mine. I play quite a lot of traditional music, folk fiddle music. I do make electronic music as often I can. I've written some scores for animated shows or films, stuff like that. I do find that it helps me somehow stay focused with what I do in classical music or violin music. That I have these all other fields where I can sort of release the other energy that doesn't really fit in with what I do for an actual living.
So this question is slightly rhetorical, but do you think that it's healthy for a classical musician, I mean, there are many of them, to be interested only in classical music? Or is it something that classical musicians should think about, whether it's really ideal to concentrate and to focus on nothing else but classical stuff?
I think it's completely dependent on the personality of the musician. If I were a teacher, which I'm not, but if I were a teacher, I would instruct probably all of my students to improvise with their instruments, not in a jazz style or Baroque improvisation or anything, but just to do something that would help them discover the sounds and the expressions that nobody else can write for them, because we all have them. Everyone's voice has qualities that nobody else can even know of. So that I hold everyone would be better off by doing a little bit of improvisation every now and then. But outside of that, I wouldn't say there's a rule for good musicianship or happy musicianship that would involve looking outside of where you feel at home. That's the best I can do.
When I looked up your life and your career, I found that I didn't know that, or maybe I've forgotten, but you are supposed to be the first Finn actually to win the Sibelius competition. And I was quite amazed that that's true. Is that true?
It actually is true, yeah.
That's funny because you're still the only one, because I thought well, he ended a national shame somehow, because finally a Finn won this competition, and maybe you got invited by the president and got some special treatment or whatever, like a national hero. The first Finn finally. Did anything like this happen, or was it just like, okay, he won and that's it?
It was quite, how should I say it? It was quite a lot back then. 95, when it happened, when I was a young boy, it was a special time in Finland, because we had been for a few years in an extremely difficult economic situation nationally. The Finnish mark had the currency that we used to have before the euro. It had been devaluated. A couple of banks had gone bankrupt. A lot of people were without jobs, and the national kind of mental health crisis was really, really blooming, because people were so desperate because of the economic situation. And then in 95, the Finnish ice hockey team won the world championship for the very first time. And they did it in the sweetest possible way, which was to beat Sweden in the final. And the final was actually played in Stockholm, in Sweden.
Couldn't go any better.
Yeah, I think any Finnish person who was alive on that day will never forget it. Okay. And then when the Sibelius competition happened very late in 95, it sort of, in some situation, it got bracketed, or it got kind of coupled with the ice hockey gold. Mostly as a joke, of course, but it did result in attention that sort of doesn't usually belong in classical music. But I did a bunch of weird stuff with my friends in the following years. I joined some improvising bands and went on national television wearing the costume of a nun to play some very strange music. So I sort of didn't capitalize on the sort of extra musical fame. There was no Voice of Germany or Voice of Finland show that I could have been a jury member of, or there was no Temptation Island TV show that I could have gone on.
But
so
why?
Basically, I continued my studies in America for another year and a half, and then just started playing concerts.
Okay, but why, for the love of God, did you dress up as a nun to go on a TV show?
It seemed appropriate at the time. I was with two very dear friends, and they were dressed up as superheroes.
Okay, that's logical then.
Yeah, of course you need a nun to balance things out, and the gender thing is sort of old-fashioned anyway. So it was good. It was good. It wasn't any sort of reference to Sound of Music, if you're wondering.
Okay. I mean, actually right now it is sort of visible and obvious that you have some sort of humor, and many classical musicians are lacking this ability in a way. How painful is it for someone like you, being in a business or in a profession or in a world where humor is not the first thing you're appreciated for? You have to practice, you have to be perfect, you have to be in time, so you have to behave. Many things you have done seem to go in another direction.
Well, I am dead serious quite often. I don't know. My experience is that so many of the musicians that have a very, very serious and very, very sort of underlined, profound public image, they are actually the most joyous and silly people in private, in rehearsal, or in when you're working with them. So I think maybe it's just that the public relations element of the international music profession, classical music profession, values a certain kind of seriousness that for many of our audience members translates into being genuine and focused and these kind of things. I suppose when you think about the ideals or the idols of classical music in the last 50 years or 100 years or so, there's not many of them that kept a sense of humor in the foreground. I don't know, maybe somebody like Herbert von Karajan would be one of the big sort of taste makers in what a classical musician, a conductor in particular, should be like. And I don't think many people think of him as a hilarious person. And he might have been.
Yeah, we never know.
Very well been. But yeah, maybe there's something with politicians or religious leaders. I think Martin Luther was probably tons more fun than any of our current religious significant people, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Especially in times like we're living through now, I would hope that the human reaction, the automatic reaction, would be to make some stupid jokes and try to see if you could sort of break the facade of being serious and threatening and kind of imposing. But it doesn't seem to be what we choose to do now. You just see more and more serious faces. People kind of trying to be somebody that they probably are not in private. It's a bit of a shame. But going back to your question, I haven't really found it a problem in my professional life. I mean, I can make a serious face if I want to, and of course, most importantly, it's about what work am I doing. If I'm playing Messiaen quartet for the end of time, then the music will take care of it for me. I will not even think of being funny. But still, in some ways, often I get the feeling that an audience of a symphonic concert or a classical concert, they sometimes tend to think that the musicians are somehow extraordinary beings in a way that might actually stop a part of the message of the music going through, because you're so busy wondering how these people can actually exist being so very special. And if that can be somehow diffused a little bit by saying something to the audience, just kind of showing somehow that you are in fact also a person, then I think it's a good idea to consider it.
Now we have to talk about your projects, and I really want to talk about them. One thing I've never seen, I've just read about it and saw it on video, was the red dress. That was a fabulous idea. And I have to explain, I mean, you can explain, I can explain a bit, but you wore a giant red dress and the audience was able to snuck into parts of the dress, and you filled the space, and you played on a pedestal, so you were above the audience, and everybody was sort of wrapped into this dress and felt the music in a way, maybe, and at least saw you in a very special way, and everybody was united with everybody else on stage. I hope I described it right, but can you explain to me how this came about and what it was like, and are there any ideas to relive that again, or is it a once-in-a-lifetime thing? And how did you invent the idea of, okay, I'm going to put myself in a giant red dress and everybody else is invited?
It's great. I wish I could take the credit for the idea. But in fact, the creator of the dress is a good friend of mine called Aamu Song. Aamu is Korean. She's lived in Finland for a couple of decades already. I think she came to Finland to study arts and design. And when she had been a young girl growing up in Seoul in South Korea, she had gone to a lot of concerts and wondered why there seems to be a bit of a wall between the audience and the performers. Maybe it's a little bit related to what I was just talking about. breaking the ice between the audience and the performers when it's appropriate. So with this childhood experience, Aamu wanted to create something that would erase the distance and the wall between a performer and his or her audience. So as a graduating project from the Design Academy in Helsinki, she made the red dress. She got 1 kilometer of red wool, thick red wool from Kvadrat in Denmark, and constructed this wonderful thing where the distance, the diameter of the dress is 20 meters. In the center, there is this, as you said, a pedestal. It's a wooden platform, 1.5 meters up. And the performer wears the dress, which then continues out 10 meters in every direction from the center. And there's these pockets for the audience members, like sleeping bags. I think 238 of them in total. When you wear the dress, you can spin in the center. The center part of the dress will follow you. You can bend, you can dance. You can do sort of anything, really. I hosted the dress at my festival I think 11 years ago. And after that, I've curated a lot of projects for the dress. One was in London, a particularly big one was in Helsinki, and then this one at the Boulez Saal in Berlin, where I played a couple of different programs in the dress. It is sort of the perfect way to present a performance, be it a lecture or a choir concert or a soloistic concert, of whatever it is. It does make the message go through to the audience in a way superior to anything that I've experienced. As I said, the idea comes from Aamu song, and these days I'm sort of like the unofficial artistic director of the dress. Whenever the dress materializes somewhere, I can plan concerts and events for it. The dress lives in beautiful boxes with a red bow tie on top of them in the Design Museum of Helsinki.
Okay. Did you get any results from the audience? I thought of maybe it was like being part of the audience, like being part of this performance of Marina Abramovic, where she sat for, I don't remember, days, I believe, in a museum, and people were able and willing to sit close to her and look her into the eyes, and everybody was crying after 10 seconds because it's so intense. And I wondered whether being in a concert where you are part of a community wrapped up in this red dress, whether people reacted drastically different than to a normal concert and came to you afterwards and told, this experience has changed my life and I'm looking completely different now on music, or what did happen?
Some of those things that you just mentioned did happen, but I think one of the most beautiful things about the dress is that it is very much about community and family. So, of course, I think Marina Abramovic, for example, is phenomenal in what she does, but she's become such a brand that I think a lot of people will go to whatever she does because it is her. It is very much about her, and it's the tragedy of a genius. But with the red dress, it's the dress is the main attraction. Even if people go to the concert because of the name who is performing in it, once you get into the dress, there's no question about it. The dress is the star of the evening, and that's the way it should be. And it's one of the reasons why I was so happy that an organization like Boulez Saal would take it, because I think the more we can bring this kind of an influence to our profession, that it is in fact more about the community than about a star performer, the healthier our profession will be.
Another project I found really fascinating, and I've just read about it as well, was that you combined music and talks about science. I think you've done it in London at Wigmore Hall, and there was you playing Bach, and then somebody else talked about medical topics. So you mix not even genres, but you mix visions of the world. Like here's science, here's art, and we're combining both for an evening, and you learn from both. I found it amazing, and I thought this is a brilliant idea, and this should be done much more often. And I wonder whether did anything else happen? Did you have any other project that was similar? And is it hard to convince concert halls to do this, or how's it like?
Well, it was a bit of a stretch to do this at the Wigmore, that has to be said. But the backstory is that I used to run sort of like an experimental chamber art festival in Finland for about 20 years. And I tried most of these ideas there. And one of the most fun ones, or some of the most fun ones, were born there. But the one we did in London was kind of like one thing we did was that I have a friend in Amsterdam who is a Finnish cancer researcher. And one of her jobs is to try to find the start switch of various cancer diseases. The mutation that, becomes one mutation too many. And then it's an avalanche of mutations, and then you can't stop it. So her job is to find the crucial mutation that pushes things too far. I have another friend who is a photographer and a researcher, and she spent quite many years photographing people having treatments for various kinds of cancer. People going in for magnetic resonance imaging of brain tumors and radiotherapy of brain tumors. She filmed a breast cancer operation in a hospital in Finland, and she has been allowed to take pictures of cancer tumors that have been removed from people. So she gets 5 minutes with the tumor in an aluminium bowl under one lamp in an operation room. And it's not something that immediately strikes you as nice. But what I noticed working with these two ladies, the photographer and the researcher, was that the idea of cancer and deadly cancer in particular became more normal for me to think about. Dying became a part of life more than what it used to be for me. And I felt that as a very healthy shift in thinking. So I designed a concert program where we would have the film of the breast cancer operation, and I would play Violin Phase by Steve Reich on top of it, which is a very interesting kind of mutation in music. There was another segment of the concert where I played the chaconne by Mr. Bach as a sort of particularly beautiful kind of musical mutation. And the Finnish composer called Perttu Haapanen wrote a piece for me that was kind of based on some of the mechanics of cancer mutations, where the whole thing starts with me eating various things on stage and the sound of the eating being incorporated into the piece through microphones and effects chains. That was one thing. Then I was introduced to a wonderful Dutch neuropsychologist called Erik Scherder, who he's like Frank Sinatra in Holland. If you put him on TV, everybody will watch. Mm-hmm. And we got the chance to do some recitals together at the Kleine Saal in Concertgebouw. And I tell you, it is literally like putting Frank Sinatra on stage. Everybody just loved it. And he's an amateur violinist himself. He said he started playing violin at the age of, 60-something, because he thought it would activate his brain. I told him I'm not so sure if that's what violin does. But so we put together a concert program where he explains what happens in the brain of a musician when he or she is warming up to play music. or when he or she is improvising. But also very interesting what happens in the brain of the audience member where he or she is listening to music. And in particular, when they are imagining music. So what happens is I play, for example, the beginning of something very famous. I play, and then I stop. And the brains of the entire audience will be processing. And then Erik Scherder will explain what part of the brain is operating, and that maybe this part of the brain is a part of your defense against memory illnesses such as Alzheimer. And that if you have a tune ringing in your head, it's you should, like an earworm, you should not attempt to stop it, because maybe your brain is actually building a fortification against memory illnesses by keeping music running. These kind of things.
But isn't this much more valuable than just having a nice evening with a Beethoven violin concerto and going home and saying, oh, okay, this was nice?
I think the right mixture, the right balance of everything is what concert promoters and performers could be going for, a bit more than what we are doing now. I do agree with you. I would love to be able to go and listen to a Beethoven concerto without anyone talking to me about cancer or brains. But to have the option to sometimes have a bit more of that, I think would be a benefit to everyone.
Being like you are, how tough is it for you to actually listen to what a conductor says to you? I mean, you're conducting yourself now. You've just been announced as first guest conductor in Helsinki and artistic advisor or co-artistic director, and you know both sides. But being you, what's it like having to listen to a conductor? I don't know whether you do, but I guess sometimes you do. Whether you do what he says to you, that's another thing. But you can't avoid hearing him. But do you actually listen to him as well?
The good part is that more often now than ever before, it's also a her, the conductor. But the thing is that I think I've been in the game for quite a long time. It's about 25 years since I started touring, and the people who really don't like what I do don't accidentally end up performing with me anymore. I think it happened more often when I was younger and there were some disasters. But at this stage of my life, I most often find myself working with people that I can really learn from. And also I'm a little bit old-fashioned in the way that I feel when it is, for example, a violin concerto, then the main responsibility of the interpretation being functional is with the soloist. This is definitely how I try to work when I'm a conductor. If I have a soloist, I will not do anything that would undermine or unbalance what the soloist is wanting to do with the piece. And another benefit of being around for quite a while already is that the people that I do work with are the people who actually want to work with me. So it's not a big problem in my life at all. And I recognize, if I work with Santtu Matias, for example, I know that he's like a band musician. When I play with him, it's sort of like playing folk music with a friend. A lot of the articulation, the phrasing, the dynamic, the structure of the interpretation, it's all improvised. We can talk about a few things, but we would never, spend a lot of hours discussing what a diminuendo means in Brahms. This is not how I work with him. It's like playing in a band. And then there are other people who will then want to discuss more, and I love that as well. Everything in the right balance.
Just a few weeks ago, I talked with Klaus Mekele, you know him as well, and he mentioned a a rule that was given to him by his conducting teacher, Jorma Panula, who has said, support but don't disturb, as the perfect rule for conducting.
I think that's perfect. Like with many things that Panula says is often easier said than done. But Klaus is, I think, one of the fantastic supporting conductors of our time, and any conductors. He's a brilliant man, and the experiences I have working with him have been extremely satisfying and fulfilling. But yeah, I did have some disasters when I was younger, and they were very educational ones. And now when I look back at them, I'm pretty sure I was wrong.
I guess you do. But what was the worst disaster then?
Well, the worst disaster must have been, I was working with Junge Deutsche Philharmonie, and this is more than 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was meant to play the third violin concerto by Hans Werner Henze in a Hans Werner Henze Jubiläum concert in Alte Oper in Frankfurt. And we had a long period of rehearsing, like Junge Deutsche Philharmonie always does, I think. 5 days of rehearsing. And by the third day, it became obvious that the conductor does not want to have anything to do with me. And he was a very respected, sort of legendary musician who has left us already. And I think he had been maybe forced to program the Hans Werner Henze concerto. I think he was doing Tchaikovsky's Six in the second half, and this was very much his cup of tea. But the Henze was really not his music. And it became this sort of authority crisis where one of the coaches of the orchestra was a trombonist, I think, from the Berlin Philharmonic, who was also a very gifted conductor. And he offered to take the Henze concerto, but Maestro would not allow it to happen. He wanted to sort of make a disaster out of it instead. So I just left. I went home. And then it took, I think, about 22 years for me to ever work with Junge Deutsche Philharmonie again.
Yeah, that's a decent disaster. You're right.
It was a bad thing to happen. But the concerto itself, it was 3 portraits out of Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann. That was the rubric, the headline of the concerto. It's a brilliant piece, and very few people are performing it actively, if anyone. And that's one good reason to remember the disaster is that I should get back into playing that piece. Now I've actually even read the book.
Just a few weeks ago, I'm always talking to Finns now these days, which is interesting, but I talked to Esa-Pekka Salonen and asked him what he thinks is the nicest sound apart from silence, opening a sauna door and opening a beer bottle. And his answer was that it's the cry of the seabirds near his house in Finland. Do you have any nearly as good answer on this question? What's the nicest sound apart from silence?
Well, one thing there's been a lot of it in the last months is when it's really cold and there's a lot of snow. When you're walking in the snow and there's kind of, I don't even have an English word for it, but it's kind of crunchy sound of the snow underneath your feet. And it's like minus 25, minus 30 degrees. The sky is completely clear. There's no wind. And the only thing you can hear is this crunch, crunch, crunch. That's a fantastic sound.
I thought maybe that you Finns have a word for this or some sort of expression, because as far as I know, there's even a Finnish word for sitting drunk on your couch at the weekend and having a good time in front of the TV and just doing nothing. And so I thought maybe there's some special expression in Finnish as well.
We would say that the snow narisee. Narisee is the word that you could also use when you open an old door and the hinges go kind of creaking.
Okay.
It doesn't really. You left out a very important part of the sitting at home in front of your TV, getting drunk in the weekend. You're meant to do it only wearing your underwear. So
I forgot that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, where the word it's kalsarikänni, and it literally means underwear drunkenness. So pants drunk is in English.
And that's fun.
It's been a while since I got to do that. I'm a father of a 4-year-old wonderful daughter, and I'm also very interested in keeping my marriage in one piece. So it's there's not that many times where you can just strip down to your underwear and get drunk in front of the television. But maybe one of these decades it'll happen again. We'll see.
I have a question that might sound strange to you being a violin player, but I always wonder, and I think I've never asked a violin player, isn't it terribly loud to have a Stradivari or a Guadagnini or an Amati or whatever so close to your ear, because you have to play loud sometimes? I mean, it might be nice when you play soft, but when you're really forced and it's necessary to play loud, isn't it awful? Because I talked to singers, and one singer said to me, "Oh, these sopranos just being at my ear, I can't stand it. It's like a plane starting sometimes." And what's it like when you have this instrument so loud, so close?
Yeah, it is dangerous. You're absolutely right. I think more and more of us are wearing some kind of ear protection when we practice. I notice it. I sometimes do myself. I notice it if I have a performance of Ligeti concerto or Thomas Adès concerto coming up. A lot of it is extremely high up on the instrument and very loud. And just in order to be able to sustain that force in a concert, you actually have to practice it like you mean it. And it does get dangerous, especially if you're in a small room. So I sometimes find it hilarious when you mention the singers, but when you are at an opera performance and there's a very sensitive scene going on between the tenor and the soprano, and they're supposed to be saying very gentle things to each other, being very close, but then they have to make 2,000 people hear it. They're literally screaming into each other's face things about how much I love you and how I could never live without you. And it's one of the more hilarious things about opera. But I think our profession in general is becoming much better at recognizing the health risks, both in an orchestral environment with your ears, but also as the kind of the workplace health things that have to do with mood and atmosphere. Just, I think people are gradually starting to recognize that everybody who plays in an orchestra most likely has some kind of insecurity about their job and their instrument. And am I playing well enough? And is anyone recognizing my talent and my abilities? Do I have any talent or abilities? Is everyone actually better at this than I am? These kind of insecurities, they are, I think orchestras are probably full of them. We're only starting to recognize that now. And I think it's brilliant, and we should talk more about it.
Since you mentioned this, I thought of one aspect of this topic, work-life balance, but in a special way. I just wondered, are there concerts or pieces which are much harder to get out after you've played them? I mean, if you play a sort of easy Mozart concerto, you might be back being yourself.
What's an easy Mozart concerto?
Okay, some easy concerto. There are easier ones and more complicated ones. say it like this. So if you've just played an easier concerto, is it easier for you to get back into your normal self, or does it take longer for you to relax and to just recuperate and to get back on your feet in the inside from a really tricky, complicated piece? Or is it just the same for you? Like, I don't know, I've never heard this Dessner concerto you're going to play here in Hamburg. I don't know whether it's really tricky or whether it's just special, whether it's hard to play manually or whether it's completely not doing what a violin does normally. And I wondered whether you have a certain amount of time to get back into being a sort of normal Pekka Kuusisto after a performance, or whether it's no difference at all what you're playing. You need 10 minutes and then you're just good to go and have a late dinner.
That's a good question. There are definitely differences between repertoire. I think, for example, when you do play or when you live through a performance of the Messiaen Quartet, you are a different person for quite a while. Sometimes when you play something by who would it be? Well, maybe even like an Arvo Pärt piece, sort of slows down your internal tempo, in my experience, quite a bit. Or a Vask's concerto, it sort of puts you in a certain kind of mood. Ligeti concerto is very difficult to go to sleep after. Same thing with Thomas Adès' Concentric Paths violin concerto. Bryce Dessner's concerto is the only piece that when I'm warming up for it, I do push-ups.
That bad?
It does require, it is like a boxing match a little bit. I've never done a boxing match, but I imagine it to be a little bit like that. Bryce's piece is much more relentless physically than most of the other repertoire. And it's much more kind of groove based and like velocity and volume based than a lot of the other stuff that I do play.
Did you ask for this to be so complicated? Because I think you've cooperated with him. He wrote it for you more or less, as far as I know. Did you tell him, I want this piece to be so tough that I need to make push-ups?
No, I did not. But speaking of that, I can't name any names because it would be too easy to track. But I just spoke to a very highly respected composer friend of mine who had been commissioned by a very, very highly respected violinist to write a piece. And they were on a Zoom call about it. And my composer friend noticed that the violinist put the recording on in the Zoom call before they started talking about how high up the piece can go and how difficult it can be. So the soloist wanted to have evidence in case the composer wrote something that turned out to be too tricky. I didn't do that with Bryce, and kind of the general nature of the concerto was completely up to him. What I did was I did suggest some alternative ways of notating things, or where I thought that he was going for an expression that could possibly come out better if written in a slightly different way. That kind of stuff I did do. And when we premiered it with Hessischer Rundfunk Sinfonieorchester in Frankfurt with Arjan Matiak, we did quite a lot of sort of quick editing work or balancing things during those rehearsals. But otherwise, it's Bryce's piece, and what it does to me when I play it, and what it does as a piece of music is unique to that piece.
And how many push-ups do you have to do before you are ready to go out?
I do 20.
20, okay.
Yeah, 20 quick ones just before going on stage. That's where it is at the moment.
2 short questions to wrap things up. The first one is, what's harder for you, getting on a stage or getting off a stage?
That's a good one, actually. It sort of depends a little bit on the concert. If the concert includes an improvisational element, then getting off stage is definitely more difficult. I like it out there, but I'm a great fan of when things are well organized. So I go out there and I do what I do, and then I come out and it's it's all fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have a bit more of an, as I said, like an improvised element, then I tend to linger on stage a little bit
until everybody tells you to finally get off stage.
Exactly.
Somebody waving at the backside and opening the door all the time.
When I was little, I've been told that I always liked to perform. But when I was a teenager, when I was 15, I went to the Carl Nielsen violin competition, and I had such a good time playing the Nielsen concerto in the final round that I played a Paganini caprice as an encore. I don't think it made it better for me in the competition. But
did you win anything finally?
I got third prize, which was okay. It was quite all right. And I probably would not have won it even if it was without the encore, because Nikolai Schneider was there. He won it.
Okay, yeah.
And he's sort of bulletproof. You don't beat him. But yeah. And
the final question is absolutely necessary for talking to a Finn. How good or how bad are you at Finnish tango?
You mean the dancing or the singing?
The dancing.
There's not a lot of challenge to it. It's just you lean against each other and move very slowly. It's nothing to do with the Argentinian style of dance. But the good part about Finnish tango is that when you listen to some of the famous singers, they are very far behind the rest of the band. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like when you watch a good German orchestra and its conductor. They are often, you see the conductor wave, and then about 2.5 seconds later they play. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like that. Mm-hmm. When the Argentinian tango has a lot of fire and a lot of rhythmic energy, the Finnish tango is more
Finnish.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. We're done. It was very nice and very much fun talking to you, and you nearly made it, or I guess you made it somehow, replacing Patrycja Kopaczynskaja as my favorite violin player here in this podcast.
What did Pat do?
She told about her life. That's fun and interesting enough. She just told about being herself.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing you and hearing this concert here in Hamburg in a few days. And maybe we'll meet, and maybe we'll even meet in a sauna in some part of our lives. And thanks very much for being here, and have a good time and enjoy coming here, and take care.
I certainly will. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Weitere Podcasts vom Hamburger Abendblatt finden Sie auf abendblatt.de/podcast.